Have you ever experienced this incredibly jarring contrast in your own life? Like, just picture this for a second. You are absolutely terrified to speak in public.
Yeah, just total panic.
Right, your heart is practically hammering its way out of your ribcage, your palms are sweating, and just the thought of, I don't know, introducing yourself to a room full of strangers makes you want to literally sink into the floor.
It's a visceral reaction, yeah.
It really is. But then, fast forward just a few hours, you're sitting in a living room, and you are the absolute loudest, most unapologetically fun and vibrant person there.
Completely different person.
Exactly. And the only difference, that second room is filled with your close friends.
Yeah, I mean, it's a striking dichotomy, right? And it just completely baffles the outside world. Because to an observer, that person in the first scenario seems inherently quiet or, maybe aloof or just intensely shy.
Right. They're the person who almost never initiates a conversation.
Exactly. Yet, to their inner circle, they are literally the life of the party. It fundamentally challenges the way we label people as either, shy or outgoing. It highlights just how radically context-dependent our personalities can actually be.
Which is exactly why we're here today. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a profoundly revealing psychological exploration into the inner world of introverts.
And it's such a fascinating world to explore.
It really is. We're trying to get past those surface level labels. We want to look at the hidden struggles, the literal, measurable, physiological reactions to crowds, and ultimately a roadmap to finding genuine social peace.
Right.
And if you're listening to this and you've always felt, a little out of step with a very loud world, our mission today is not about fixing you.
Far from it, actually. What we are decoding today is the reality that introversion is not a flaw. And it certainly isn't a weakness.
Yeah.
Rather, it is a highly specific, deeply ingrained biological and psychological mechanism. It's for energy management and preserving psychological safety.
Right. Because for so long, society has treated socializing like this mandatory software update.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Like a notification pops up that says, you must install this outgoing, highly visible personality to function in modern life.
Right.
The research we're looking at proves that for some of you, trying to run that specific software is, it's practically frying your internal hardware.
It really is frying the hardware. Because when you look at the underlying physiology of what actually happens when an introvert is pushed out of their comfort zone, it's not a matter of simply feeling a little nervous.
It's way more intense than that.
It's a cascading, systemic, physical reaction. You experience that sinking heart, the sudden hesitation, stumbling over words.
The tight throat.
Yes. The throat gets physically tight, the voice becomes shaky, and perhaps most terrifyingly, the mind goes completely blank. Especially during an introduction, or when forced to speak up on the spot.
Let's break down that mind going blank moment. Because, it feels like a personal failure when it happens. You just feel so stupid. But it's actually your brain's survival mechanism kicking in, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's totally biological.
The cognitive load of trying to manage the supposed threat of strangers literally shuts down your prefrontal cortex. The exact part of your brain responsible for witty banter and smooth introductions just goes offline.
Exactly. It's a total physiological shutdown. And it's even more extreme when it comes to the sensory overload of crowds. The source material uses a really specific term to describe this. They call it a buzzing brain.
Wow, buzzing. That is so accurate.
Right. That buzzing is a perfect descriptor for neurological overwhelm. Because think about what a brain is actually doing in a crowded room. It's trying to process this absolute onslaught of inputs simultaneously.
Right, the music, the lights.
Yeah, and it has to track multiple voices over that background music, monitor the micro expressions of 3 different people, anticipate social expectations, and filter out unpredictable variables all at once.
That sounds exhausting, just listing it out.
It is. A brain wired for introversion reaches maximum processing capacity incredibly fast. It literally drains the social battery in a matter of seconds. It's this immediate catastrophic depletion of energy.
You know what it makes me think of? It makes me think of an older smartphone. When you take an old phone out into freezing cold weather?
Oh yeah, and it just dies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The battery indicator might say 80%, but the second that icy air hits it, boom, it just dies. The screen goes completely black. Now, the phone isn't fundamentally broken. The internal components are perfectly fine.
Right.
It is just in the exact wrong environment to function optimally.
That is such a brilliant analogy.
Yeah.
Because when you bring that phone back inside to a warm, familiar room, what happens? It turns right back on and operates flawlessly.
Yes.
And that is the exact mechanism behind the familiar friends phenomenon you mentioned at the start.
Ah, okay, so it's the environment warming up, essentially.
Precisely. Around people you implicitly trust, your brain is no longer scanning for social threats. The environment is safe, so that intense background processing drops to near zero, and your battery operates at full capacity.
So you have the energy to just be yourself.
Exactly. You can let loose, be loud, and show your true personality because your nervous system isn't under siege.
But the sensitivity to the environment goes even deeper than just, crowded room versus living room, doesn't it? From what we're reading, it comes down to extreme sensitivity regarding the exact size of the group.
Oh, absolutely. Group size is critical. For someone with this nervous system profile, a one-on-one interaction is often the absolute only way to feel truly at ease.
Just one other person.
Yeah, adding even just one more person to a conversation suddenly transforms it from a safe harbor into exhausting work.
Why is that? Why does just one person ruin the dynamic?
Because a one-on-one dynamic is highly predictable. You are tracking one set of facial expressions, one tone of voice, one emotional state. The processing load is manageable.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the moment you introduce a third person, you aren't just adding one more data point to process.
Right, the math changes entirely. You go from tracking the connection between you and person B to tracking you and person B, you and person C, and the relationship between person B and person C.
Exactly. You nailed the math. The processing load on your social battery increases exponentially, not linearly. Every new person multiplies the invisible social dynamics you have to monitor.
Wow. So if the physical and mental drain is this intense, it naturally begs the question of origins. Like, why does this happen? Is someone just born with a battery that drains faster in public? Or is this intense need for retreat something that gets, programmed into us by the world?
Well, it's a combination of both nature and nurture. And honestly, understanding the interplay between the two is what gives us the complete picture here.
Okay, let's start with nature.
So on the nature side, there's a biological baseline. Some individuals inherently require solitude to restore their dopamine levels and recharge their energy.
Just how they're wired.
Exactly. They are naturally slow to warm up to new stimuli. That is just a biological reality.
But the psychological reality, the nurture part, is where things get really heavy in this source material.
It really does.
Because beyond the natural baseline, there is this learned defensive mechanism that is built on a foundation of past negative experiences. Like if you're listening and this resonates, you probably did try to open up in the past.
Right. People don't usually start out completely closed off.
Exactly. You didn't just hide in your room your whole life. You tried to play the extrovert game. You actively tried to be outgoing and make friends.
And what the psychological profiles reveal is that those attempts were frequently met with rejection.
Which is just heartbreaking.
It is. Children who attempt to socialize, but perhaps, miss a subtle cue or hesitate a moment too long, they're routinely ignored, pushed aside, or explicitly labeled by their peers as weird or difficult.
Right.
They are actively punished by their social environment just for trying to engage while operating on a different biological rhythm.
Imagine the conditioning that takes place there. You try to force yourself into that loud, highly visible mold. It drains all your energy, and your reward is being ostracized.
That's a terrible feedback loop.
It really is. But pure rejection is only one half of the equation, isn't it? The truly devastating blow often comes from the family dynamic.
Yeah, this part of the research is particularly tough to read.
Right, because when a child takes these deeply painful feelings of being overwhelmed and tries to share them with their parents, the very people who are supposed to be their ultimate safe harbor, what happens?
The response is all too often rooted in profound misunderstanding. Instead of receiving comfort or, validation that their nervous system just works differently, they are met with arguments.
Just go play, right?
Exactly. Parents, often acting out of their own anxiety or societal conditioning, tell the child that it's your problem. They tell them they are overthinking it, or that they need to look at themselves to figure out why they can't just be normal and go play with the group.
Wow. That is chronic invalidation. If you are a developing mind and your body is practically screaming that a loud, crowded room is painful, but your parents are telling you that your pain is actually just a character flaw, that creates massive cognitive dissonance.
Massive.
It teaches you that you cannot trust your own internal alarms.
And over time, that chronic invalidation fundamentally shifts how the brain views the outside world. The world transitions from being merely exhausting to being actively unsafe.
So the true self gets locked away in a fortress.
Precisely, because safety and a total lack of judgment only exists with a very small, carefully curated list of familiar people.
Right, going back to the living room example.
Yeah, you stop showing your real personality in public because the risk of psychological harm is simply too high. So introversion deepens. It evolves from a simple preference for quiet into an active, impenetrable shield against a world that has repeatedly proven it will not protect you.
But wait, let me push back on this for a second. If so much of this behavior stems from being rejected by peers, from parents invalidating your feelings, and from learning that the world is fundamentally unsafe, is introversion just a trauma response disguised as a personality trait? Like, are we just slapping a polite label on deep-seated social anxiety?
That is a great question, and it's a crucial distinction to make. The behaviors, like the hiding, the intense fear of judgment, the complete shutting down, those absolutely can be a learned defense mechanism.
Right, a trauma response to an unaccepting world.
Exactly. However, introversion itself, the underlying trait, is not a flaw. It is not a disorder.
So we have to separate the natural temperament from the wounds inflicted by society's reaction to that temperament.
Precisely. The baseline need for quiet, the slow warming up to new people, the biological requirement for solitary recharge, that is a healthy natural state.
Okay, that makes sense.
The panic, the feeling of being weird, the fortress building, that is the trauma response caused by a society that refused to accept that natural state. The need to protect your energy is a valid biological parameter, not a psychological weakness.
And because society at large still refuses to understand this, the external pressure to just be outgoing doesn't fix the anxiety. It actively amplifies it.
It makes it 10 times worse.
Exactly.
Right.
Think about the universal touchstone for this kind of nervous system overload mentioned in the text, the gym class test.
Oh, the gym class scenario. It perfectly illustrates the collision between an introverted nervous system and societal demands. Because the anxiety for a physical performance test in front of peers, it doesn't just start when the whistle blows.
No, not at all.
It begins days in advance.
It's a prolonged, agonizing state of hypervigilance. Like your body starts releasing cortisol on Sunday night for a test happening on Tuesday.
Right.
It's driven by the spotlight effect, the terrifying certainty of being watched, being judged, and the absolute dread of making a mistake and being laughed at by a group. And, it's not just gym class. As adults, it's group discussions at school, team building exercises at work.
Oh, corporate icebreakers are the worst.
The absolute worst. It's the constant gnawing feeling of being out of place, afraid to ask to join a team, and terrified to voice what you genuinely think.
And what compounds this dread is the casual, everyday toxicity of the advice given to introverts in these scenarios. People say things like, "Why are you so quiet? You should be more outgoing. Just go make some friends."
As if it's just a switch you forgot to flip. Like, oh, go make friends. Why didn't I think of that? I'll just go do that right now.
Right, so dismissive.
It treats a complex neurological energy system like a simple lack of effort.
It's incredibly reductive. Telling someone experiencing neurological overwhelm to just be outgoing is like telling someone drowning to just breathe more air.
Wow.
Yeah. It fundamentally ignores the reality of their environment and forcing it. Pushing yourself to speak up and perform extroversion when your battery is completely depleted is a profoundly counterproductive strategy.
Because faking extroversion requires massive amounts of executive function. You are manually overriding your natural instincts, which drains the battery even faster.
Exponentially faster.
Right. It just leaves you feeling more exhausted, more broken, and totally defeated. But why do we do this? I mean, why do we constantly frame extroversion as the default healthy baseline? When a teacher tells a kid they need to participate more to get a good grade, aren't they basically telling them their biological baseline is wrong?
Yes, essentially. We do it because modern society equates volume and visibility with health, competence, and success.
It's just easier to measure.
Exactly. It's much easier to measure engagement by how often someone speaks than by the depth of their internal processing. When we force a child who naturally recharges in solitude into the center of a crowd and demand they perform, we aren't teaching them socialization.
What are we teaching them?
We are teaching them how to mask. We are teaching them that their authentic self is unacceptable.
So, if faking it leads to exhaustion and society isn't going to magically change its volume tomorrow, how do you actually navigate this loud, demanding world without completely burning out?
That is the big question.
Right, because you can't just live in a cave. You have to go to work, you have to exist in public. How do you survive?
Well, the source material says you survive by shifting the paradigm. You stop trying to change who you are, and you start rewriting your rules of engagement.
Okay, what does that look like practically?
The first, most critical step is abandoning the pressure to be the life of the party and finding a social style that actually fits your nervous system.
So if you are stuck at a networking event or like a large family gathering, you don't need to work the room.
No, definitely not.
You don't need to entertain the group. You just scan the room, find one person who seems calm or comfortable, and initiate a simple chat. You actively recreate that one-on-one dynamic that we know doesn't drain your battery exponentially.
Exactly. You manage the variables. And alongside that is a deeply vital psychological tool, granting yourself the permission to retreat.
Permission to retreat. I like that.
It's huge. If a situation is buzzing your brain and draining your battery, stepping back is perfectly acceptable. Leaving a party early or needing 30 minutes of absolute silence in your car before driving home, it doesn't mean you are bad at socializing.
Right. You haven't failed.
Not at all. It simply means that specific environment has exceeded your current energy budget.
But wait, if you just pull the ripcord and step back every time you feel your social battery start to drain, aren't you just shrinking your world? Like, how is that not just running away from the challenge and isolating yourself?
I get that concern, but pacing yourself is not the same as quitting. The goal is absolutely not isolation. The goal is stamina.
Stamina. Okay.
Think about it.
Yeah.
If you run your battery to zero every single time you go out, you will eventually associate going out with total burnout, and you'll stop going out entirely.
Ah, that makes total sense.
But by stepping back when you hit 30%, you preserve enough energy to try again tomorrow. You control the narrative. And from that place of control, you can take actionable steps to build confidence without overwhelming your nervous system.
Like preparation. The text mentions taking 5 minutes before you walk into a social setting to prep a few things you might want to say.
Exactly. And why does preparation work? Because it preloads your prefrontal cortex.
So you don't have to think on your feet.
Right. When the sensory overwhelm hits and the brain starts buzzing, you don't have to compute new social inputs on the fly. You have a script ready, which drastically reduces the processing load.
That's incredibly practical.
Furthermore, practicing expressing your thoughts in small, highly controlled circles allows you to build a genuine sense of security.
So you are curating your socialization. By practicing in small, safe circles, you build real, rooted confidence. It's not the loud, performative confidence of the extrovert illusion. It's a quiet, unshakable self-assurance because you are no longer depleting your energy trying to squeeze into a psychological mold that doesn't fit.
Yes, exactly. You are operating optimally within your own parameters.
And when you operate within your own parameters, the entire metric for social success changes.
It shifts completely.
Because the loud world will tell you that success is measured by the size of your network, how many followers you have, or how aggressively you dominate a meeting. But if there's one thing to take away from this deep dive, it's that we need to completely deconstruct that metric.
Totally.
The goal of life isn't to collect a massive, exhausting inventory of casual friends. And it certainly isn't to look at outgoing people with jealousy.
Right, because there is no superior personality type. Both the deeply introverted and the highly extroverted have distinct evolutionary and social reasons for existing. The need to observe, to process deeply, and to interact cautiously is a feature of human psychology, not a bug.
By accepting your pace and building simple, honest, and highly curated relationships, you do the most important thing possible. You protect your precious energy.
That's the core of it all.
Your circle might be incredibly small. It might just be 2 or 3 people. But that small circle is a fortress of safety. And within that safety, you get to experience connections that are real, stable, and completely free of the buzzing, exhausting performance.
Because when you no longer have to spend every ounce of your energy defending your nervous system against sensory overload and the fear of judgment, your true, vibrant personality finally has the space to emerge.
A person from the living room.
Exactly. And that is how you find a life filled with a genuine sense of inner peace and true belonging.
It's the ultimate realization that quality will always trump quantity. And alignment with your true self will always bring more peace than performing for others.
Wonderfully said.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We've spent this time talking about how introversion is intimately tied to managing energy and seeking psychological safety. Well, look at the reality of the modern world we live in today.
Oh, it's intense.
It is increasingly loud, hyper-connected, and digitally overwhelming. We have devices in our pockets demanding our attention, our reactions, and our social energy 24 hours a day.
Constant demands.
Right. So in an era defined by constant notification and chronic digital burnout, could it be that the introvert's natural biological instinct to unplug, to retreat, and to fiercely protect their mental energy isn't just a valid personality trait, but is actually becoming our greatest evolutionary advantage?
Wow. That is a profound shift in perspective. The very trait society called a weakness might literally be the exact mechanism needed to survive the modern age.
Something to think about the next time you decide to stay in and recharge. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take care of yourselves, honor your energy, and we'll catch you next time.